let's not forget that travel used to look like this. Destinations weren't just addicted to tourism, they always wanted just a little bit more. Not only is the overcrowding unpleasant for both locals and visitors, now there's a new twist. In this age of social distancing, such crowds seem unthinkable. Clearly, we need a better model for tourism. There's a reason the Apple Store looks like this, and not like this. It's open and sleek, and there aren't many products. Yet they have more sales per square meter than any other retailer. They have plenty of space for more products, but they realized that less is more. They found that sweet spot. And tourism needs to find its sweet spot as well. Here's what I mean by that. Conventional wisdom says that tourism spending is linear. That means if one tourist spends $100, 2 tourists gets you $200, and 3 tourists, you get the idea. But let's put spending on the x-axis and the number of visitors on the y-axis. As one goes up, so does the other. We've been thinking this way because this is exactly how it works at fast food chains, at hotels, on airplanes, at Disney. More visitors equals more money. But there are 2 important distinctions. 1, these are synthetic experiences. There's no authentic culture or nature that gets destroyed. And 2, they all have limits. Restaurants have a certain number of seats, or there's a building limit set by the fire department. Hotels don't knock at 3 a.m. and put extra people in your hotel room, and airlines don't seat extra passengers on your lap when you fly. Even Disney closes its gates when it hits maximum capacity. So they carefully protect the experience they offer to prevent overcrowding. But this thinking simply doesn't cross over to entire destinations. With tourism, when you add more people, the city centers and beaches get crowded. The authenticity, visitor experience, local life quality, and environment all go down. And for decades, we failed to place a real value on those things. And for decades, it's gone down. In 1980, there were about 300 million international travelers, and now we've hit 1.5 billion. That's a 500% increase in 40 years. And some places are growing even faster. Iceland's tourism grew 400% in 7 years. Sometimes it can happen overnight with the publication of an article or a hit movie. After the Swiss restaurant appeared on the cover of a book, it got so inundated with tourists that it shut down for years. Now take a moment and imagine if your destination suddenly got an extra 5 million visitors next year. Chances are you don't have a single policy in place to keep that from happening. Sure, you might say there aren't enough hotel rooms, but if there's a big enough demand, Airbnb rooms will pop up and tour buses will start dropping people off. It may not be 5 million, but certainly enough to overwhelm your city. And as Corona lifts and international travel is slow to resume, a swarm of domestic travel is likely to engulf many places this year. As the destination gets crowded, your more discerning customers are going to go someplace else, either because it's unpleasant or because of social distancing.
When I go back, I don't want to stand in line. I don't want to be in a crowd. So I'm going to look for places where, you know what, I'm going to enjoy it the way it was meant to be enjoyed. And if I have to pay a little more to do it, I'll be happy to write that check.
Now let me be clear, this isn't an elitist thing. It's not about just trying to attract only rich customers. It's about their spending. Bill Gates might visit, but if he shows up on a tour with a guide and gets out of his car for only 2 hours, he may not spend a thing. I'm talking about the economic impact on the destination. And if a destination lets in too many people, it can have a negative impact on revenue.
Yeah, well, last summer, me and my family did a road trip through Croatia and Montenegro. And basically, if we saw a cruise ship in port, we just kept going, didn't stop. It's just not worth fighting the massive crowds that sort of pile into these ancient medieval cities. I mean, we're not high rollers, but, you know, we were there for a week and we were like eating in restaurants, staying in hotels, doing activities.
So you heard both Peters say they would avoid places that get mass tourism crowds. They're not alone. Many people feel this way, and many more will when they're worried about a virus. Can a destination actually have more visitors but make less money? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
You're definitely onto something here. More visitors do not guarantee more revenue.
When a place gets crowded, there will always be bottom feeders who will set up little stands and sell imported fridge magnets to day visitors. But that doesn't mean the destination is earning more money. Let's take a look at how this can affect total spending with this purely hypothetical example. Now let's say we limit visitors by 30%, but we just limit the low spenders by restricting, say, tour buses. Again, not poor people, I'm just talking about day visitors who aren't spending much. So it keeps the destination more authentic, keeps the service and experience high, and attracts overnight guests. This will increase the average amount each visitor spends. So this hypothetical model without low spenders could look like this. The specific numbers here aren't real, but the concept is. There's 7 big wins. Better life quality for locals, lower impact on the culture, better for the environment, better experience for the visitors, and limiting access creates a higher demand for the destination, which is great PR and will likely spread visitors into the shoulder and off-peak seasons. Plus, potentially more revenue, which also means it's not linear. The spending visitor curve would look more like this, with diminishing returns or even a negative bend. So here's max revenue. There will be some number of visitors where the local quality of life starts to suffer. There's another point when environmental damage begins to increase. Let's say that here is where the authenticity diminishes. And finally, here's where that combo of crowds, eco-damage, and lost authenticity starts to deter higher average spending. The basic idea is not new, by the way. Stanley Plog made a very similar graph about tourism decline in 1967, and the European Commission paid for this report. One of the main things that brings down tourism is too many tourists. So if a destination can make a smart calculation with those things and find a smart way to limit visitors, they will hit that sweet spot. It all seems so obvious, right? So why aren't destinations doing it? Because within a destination, over here, you have stakeholders like airlines, hotels, tours, restaurants, theme parks that have successful linear business models, where more tourists equals more money. And over here, you've got the destination as a whole that has a bell curve or at least diminishing returns. And that puts the destination's business model at odds with its own stakeholders.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Over here, if they're full, they don't ruin the experience for their guests. They just add more flights, build more hotels, and add more restaurants. If the crowds annoy and scare off the high spenders, well, the low budget and budget travelers take over. The stakeholders diversify by adding budget airlines, budget hotels, and cheap souvenirs. But over here, they see the big picture. They see that it has essentially become a race to the bottom. So with these two forces, how does it play out? Here in the middle, there's the DMO, or Destination Marketing Organization, that government organization that promotes tourism and pays for ads. When the key stakeholders want to grow, they put pressure on the DMO to spend more to attract more visitors. And the DMO is often getting bonuses or praise by their political bosses for attracting more visitors and showing that the tax money they're spending is really effective, because the political bosses still think that tourism revenue is linear, in part because many get their tourism tax revenue from hotels, which are linear. So the DMO has been siding with the linears. And that's why we've got so much overcrowding or over-tourism, or as I prefer to call it, unbalanced tourism.
I feel bad for DMOs. They're often trapped in the middle. It's politicians who need to understand tourism better. And I think that if they did, they'd often take different decisions.
One of the big problems with over-tourism is that it rarely looks like this. So most cities don't think they have it. The media's use of huge crowd photos has made it tricky to self-diagnose. It's like when they show what lungs look like after smoking for 30 years. But this patient also has lung cancer. All it takes is one bottleneck or some temporary congestion, too few parking spots for cars or buses, or too many people on the walking street a few weeks of the year, a line outside the popular museum during peak season. Things that can be fixed with proper management. And as with cancer, the sooner you catch it, the better. The industry has known for some time that the negative side effects I mentioned are more important for its long-term success than supporting the short-term profits of the linears. But they lacked the political will to make some tough decisions. The coronavirus provides that opportunity. The ability to limit crowds or make visitor restrictions is now politically possible because it's done in the name of public health. The fact that it's also good for the destination's sustainability and profitability is a nice side effect. But because the capacity is being restricted even more, it's important that they do things in a smart way. So what should they do? 1. Show the linear stakeholders how this benefits them long term. That if the beaches and forests are polluted and overcrowded, or there's not enough room for social distancing, guests will go someplace else. That these things aren't just a turnoff for visitors, but for locals. And that as many locals move away, those stakeholders will have a challenge finding high-quality employees. 2. Create a destination management organization, one that is separated from the marketing department by a firewall, a real firewall, not just the same people with an extra role. It needs to be treated like the separation between church and state or advertising and editorial. You can't have the same people who are getting bonuses for bringing more tourists also be in charge of limiting them. So this decision needs to happen at the tourism minister level of government. And the good news is that there is a precedent for it. Barcelona has its tourism marketing offices here and its management offices over here. 3. Use that new organization to find that sweet spot and regain control. Remember, a destination can have tourists, but the tourists shouldn't have the destination.
A destination can have tourists, but the tourists shouldn't have the destination.
Conduct a carrying capacity assessment and an environmental assessment and figure out what those actual curve levels are in your destination. How many visitors can you handle in a good way before those things have a negative impact? And if you need help figuring this out, call me. Actually, email works better. Okay, I know I said last week that I was going to talk about limiting cruise ship passengers, and that was my intention. But then I realized I needed to explain this bit first. Next week, I'll get into the details of who to limit and how.